Are you doing this all as one presentation? Is it one presentation here?
It is combined,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, we are live. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the October 10th, 2022 Grants Pass City Council Workshop. I know that DJ is on his way, so we will all be here this morning. First up, we are going to discuss Tourism Advisory Committee role as well as city allocation of lodging tax revenues. Looks like Brad Clark's going to kick us off.
Good morning, Mayor, Council, members of the public. We do have with us this morning, besides JC and myself, who we're going to kind of tag team on the original presentation, but for any questions that the council may have afterwards, we do have Doug Bradley, who's chair of the Tourism Advisory Committee, and Terry Hopkins, who is vice chair. And then we also have Tori Middlestat, who, as you all know, is the director of Visit Grants Pass, our DMO. So lots of this material will kind of interact and, interface with some of the work that they're doing too. So I was going to start out on your agenda today. It does have two different topics. You'll see that there is only one packet in front of you. We did combine the two presentations into a single PowerPoint. They're just very much kind of interrelated. So I was going to do the first portion related to the purpose of Tourism Advisory Committee. And then we thought we'd just take a break there and see if you want to discuss, and then we can move on to the financial portion. See if I can get this to work today. So the purpose is really threefold, as we understood it, as staff understood the direction today. First is showing you some examples of other municipalities' lodging tax spending throughout the state of Oregon. Then options for new tourism grant program, and then potential allocation of the 2022 excess lodging tax funds and different ways to do that. We have also included a discussion related to the Committee on Public Art and specifically the potential use of money by that committee over the years. There's been lots of discussion about that, and so JC and his staff have done some detailed analysis on that, and we'll present that to you. So the relationship to the council goals is to encourage economic opportunities by exploring new approaches to invest lodging tax revenue. Some of this material you may know, I'll kind of move quickly through it. The TAC is one of our longer standing committees, been around since 1990. And the mission at that point was to provide advice and comments / concerns to the council on the city's tourism program. It is today now comprised of 9 members, a few more than what it was in 1990. And the description in the description of the TAC is including lodging, real estate, food and beverage, recreation, marketing, and related industries. So those are kind of the fields that we desire to have on there in terms of representation. And I think we're doing pretty well right now with that coverage. The purpose of the TAC, again, this is our current purpose, is to encourage visitors and residents to engage in community activities while enhancing the positive image of our city through marketing, promotions, and destination management. They review and advise the work of the city's tourism contractor, including reporting findings and recommendations to council as needed. So I think this is part of why this topic got put onto your agenda today, because as you know, that's a little bit outdated. When John Bowen was doing the work for the city, I think that was appropriate, may need some tweaking now. Here's just an image of what the current FY23 tourism budget looks like. Has total resources of 1.5 million. As you know, a big chunk of the contractual professional services line is the pass-through to our DMO. In terms of staffing on that, the two main personnel that we have under tourism are our economic development specialist and a little bit of my time. So in June of 21, the Destination Marketing Organization was created, and that resulted in sort of shifting topics related to what the Tourism Advisory Committee had been talking about to what they really are talking about now. A lot of their work before was with John. He would attend those meetings regularly and kind of update them on a lot of the events that he was working on, et cetera. And that was kind of a focus for them. So now that at least the marketing side has shifted over to the DMO, a lot of that work in terms of agendas, topics, is no longer there. So it kind of has risen to the surface, this question of, really what are the things that the council would like to see the Tourism Advisory Committee now focus on. And since they hired Tori, who has a strategic plan, the TAC has been focused more on sort of local assets and talking about events and other attractions, and less on marketing and some of those other core duties that are outlined in our contract with the DMO. So they have talked a few times now over the last year about some projects and activities that are focused, within that 50-mile radius, not outside that 50-mile radius, and things that can, that would not overlap or duplicate the work that the DMO is already doing. A few of those things were included, in last December when the TAC met, and then they made their recommendations to the City Council on strategic plan for this year. Those are the 6 items listed at the bottom there that there were the recommendations to you: completing the downtown master plan, alley beautification, meeting with other committees, permanent parklets, Dollar Mountain infrastructure, and then they had an item seeking council direction on the TAC. So some of that we're here, and many of those things are underway. Some other topics that came up since their recommendation to you for your strategic plan are listed here. Financial support to a downtown merchant association. That did end up getting added into your strategic plan. Instagram-worthy walls, expanding agritourism, expanding running events. There's an Indian relay horse race that one of the TAC members has had some experience with that was discussed. A third-party assessment of the Grants Pass tourism assets, bringing in a third-party contractor who would actually do a deeper dive on our local assets and how we might be able to, leverage those into greater tourism opportunities. Convention center was thrown out by one of the members, river-based and outdoor recreation tourist activities, expanding that area. Balloon and Kite Festival, not something that would be new for us, but has been kind of lying there stagnant for a while. And then expanding the potential of Sportsman Park. Here's a few others. Having docents in historical dress at certain times of year that would be there, that may be an attraction, particularly linked into the historic district. Ale and distillery trail, expanding fiber optic and hang gliding, paragliding opportunities. So a lot of that just kind of brings up the question about where to go from here with those ideas, and I think that's why the second half of today's discussion may help in terms of talking about the allocation of the lodging tax money. One concept that was discussed using the non-DMO, not part of the 28% that is within the 70%. We won't get into that now, but the revenues to expand would be an annual grant program. And I'll show you here in just a couple of slides that is an approach that's being used by other communities around the state as well. Particularly City of Ashland, we looked at, and they have operated a grant program for a few years now. They have a minimum award in their grant program of $1,000 and a maximum of $5,000. They do a spring grant cycle that has awards in the early summer that kind of focuses on starting July 1. In order to get those grants, you do have to be a nonprofit, and you have to be non-government. Scoring is based on the likelihood to increase hotel occupancy rates in Ashland, increasing jobs that are related to tourism, lodging, restaurants, beverage industries, and then the potential to increase retail sales. So that's some of the criteria that Ashland uses when they're assessing those grant applications. They do not match promotion or marketing dollars with amounts that are given to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and any of their local grants. Contributions can make the event bigger and thus draw people in, but the grant applications do need to, quote, show that you are marketing to and attracting customers and or visitors at the event or program for more than 50 miles away. So that, as you know, is in the Oregon Revised Statute as something that needs to be looked at. So they do include that in their grant materials. So as I mentioned, one of the options is to utilize the TAC as the review and or approval body for tourism grants, similar to what Ashland's doing. We could set up a couple of cycles a year, and staff would be involved with verifying that eligibility before it goes on, not unlike what we're currently doing with the economic development grants. So real quickly, 4 examples of other cities in Oregon and how they're using their non-DMO tourism funds. Roseburg, they have a significant asset there with their wildlife safari. They do focus a lot on that particular asset. They have a local food trail, food and wineries, kind of marketing to sort of attract people for the area-wide wineries around Roseburg. They have also they have 2 grants, winter and summer. Pendleton, they use some of their funds for their convention center, events, music festivals, mountain bike trails, and then some historic Oregon Trail activities. Albany is, this is about 3 or 4 months old, but at that time they were really heavily analyzing this very topic, just like we are, about how they are going to spend these TLT monies. They have the Northwest Art and Air Show that historically has gotten a pretty big chunk of these funds, as well as the quilt show at the Expo Center. And then finally, we looked at Redmond. They use some of their non-DMO funds to do a feasibility study. They have also used it related to Smith Rock and historic hotel revitalization. They have an outdoor public art gallery that has gotten some focus, and then also a quilt show and internet infrastructure related to broadband, and doing some analysis on the broadband infrastructure there. So I think that I will stop there and just maybe see how you want to take this, Mayor, in terms of whether just having JC come up and continuing with the lodging tax, or you want to focus on TAC.
Well, let's see if anybody has any questions at this point. And Brian did you, Rick? Okay, Rick, then Brian.
Thank you, Brad. On that 50-mile limit for advertising, is that set by state statute, or is that just?
It is.
It is. Okay, thank you.
Brian.
Thanks, Brad. So those cities that you just gave examples of, we're talking about, because there's 2 categories of tourism dollars. There's the tourism promotion dollars, and then there's the tourism-related facilities dollars. So it sounds like these examples are related specifically to the tourism promotion dollars. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that is correct. The mountain bike trails, I think in Pendleton may have been an infrastructure-related one.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, let's continue through with the background on the money, and then we'll hear from our tourism committee folks on
You bet.
what they have to say.
Find my spot here. Okay, so we have, City of Grants Pass collected some kind of transient lodging tax since 1981. Section 4.05 of the Muni Code outlines the rules for collection and administration, and then further defines in 4.05.240 about the disposition and use of the specific 12% tax that we have. And then ORS 320 through 300 through 320, 365 is the state of Oregon definitions for how local governments collect and spend their lodging tax. So I'm going to go through these. I'm not going to read all of these because it is kind of dry, but these are the definitions inside the ORS. So there is a definition for tourism and tourism promotion, and so we specifically fall under A, where we try and advertise and publicize to welcome tourists. And we haven't done probably as much of B, but that gives us the opportunity to do research if we wanted to do a study on why people are coming to the City of Grants Pass. C is under the DMO, and then D is obviously any marketing of special events. And then further defined, tourism-related facility. So it is a conference center, convention center, or visitor information center. And I believe our Welcome Center falls underneath that category. And then B, other improved real property that has a useful life of 10 or more years and has a substantial purpose of supporting tourism or accommodating tourist activities. So I have a list on this next slide of what we feel as a city of our facilities. The question was brought up last Monday about artwork being a tourism related facility, and I don't think it qualifies under this classification. And then tourists, there is a definition. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there is the 50 miles on section A here. And then in talking with some of my colleagues around the state, as far as data is concerned, most people rely on B to do their calculation. So if they see upticks in their lodging tax as far as revenues coming in, they relate that back to the events that were going in at that point in time or at that month. So there's not a lot of data collection potentially to make sure that that 50 or more miles is actually being met, because how are you going to track all those people? So here are what we believe are the tourism-related facilities. So Welcome Center, Reinhardt Volunteer Park, and Riverside Park. There is some infrastructure that is connected to some of these that we think qualifies too, like the pedestrian bridge, because that is part of the activity, people getting in and out of the locations. And again, to go into more definitions, so this is why we have our weird, funky allocations. It is by Oregon statute, and I'm going to put this in a reverse order because it reads better this way, but Section 6 of this talks about 70% needing to be spent on tourism-related or tourism promotion and tourism-related facilities, and the other 30% can go into city services. Now, Section 5 talks about the tourism promotion and related facilities. And C, we don't have C, which is debt service, and that is an allowable expenditure on the promotion side. And then Section B is that 30% in the last 3% of the 70-30 split. That is city services that we can deem wherever we would like. And then Section 3, this is part of that weird 70-30 split. So we are grandfathered in. Anything that was allocated before July 1 of 2003 could stay as it was allocated. From 2003 forward, any new transient lodging tax would need to be split with the 70-30 rule. And I'm not going to read all of this, but this is our Muni Code that is very specific as far as all of the percentages and where they are being allocated to. And Section C is the last 3% that was done in 2001. And you'll see that it does mention the tourism program at 70% and 30% to public safety. And here's what that looks like as far as percentages. And as a reiteration, that 7% and 2% columns, those are previous allocations pre the 2003 ORS rule. And then you see that the 3%, we had to do the 70-30 split. This is what the current budget looks like for fiscal year 23. Just want to call out the easiest way to kind of read this now is the far right column, which is the percentage split after all of those further percentage splits inside the further percentage. So 28% of the DMO is within the 40% inside there. And then obviously public safety, parks, economic development, and then downtown development. So now I'm going to get into COPA a little bit because artwork seems to be connected to how you may want to be using your transient lodging tax dollars. And so in the handbook, in general, an individual committee does not have budget unless one is authorized by the council or at the time of its formation. Projects requiring the allocation of resources shall go through the city's strategic planning process. If a committee project arises outside of this process, the city manager should be contacted. Unless a committee has funds specifically appropriated to it, the committee may not spend or commit to the spending without first obtaining guidance from the city manager. And then it further goes on in the handbook about the disbursements, and all disbursements need to go through a staff liaison for approval, processing, and payment, meaning that even though the committee may have projects, they still need to work with staff because the committee technically does not have spending authority. And this goes further into that. This is the admin policy section in the committee handbook that they do not have. That is the policy of the city of Grants Pass to specifically authorize staff, city manager, or finance director to consider or approve any of the purchases requested by the committee. And that includes the $50,000 limit that it has to come back to council per our municipal code. And a little bit more background for COPA. They've been given previous allocations for a variety of activities for current activities and has a current balance. So some of those examples are Art in Motion, Art Along the Road, parking lot artwork. There were previous ongoing allocations discontinued in fiscal year 20 because the general fund monies could not sustain the contribution. However, in fiscal year 23 budget, they were given $15,000 for parking lot art, and that is LB 6318. They do currently have dedicated fund balance of about $7,600 as of the end of this current fiscal year that we're auditing right now. And how did this happen? Just as a kind of an easy income statement. Now they have other activities that they've done throughout the years, but this is the best way to kind of show and explain how they built up this fund balance. It has to do with Art in Motion. You can tell that in 2016, they got an $1,100 donation, and then throughout history through 2022, they are underspending those dollars. And so it is a donation for a specific purpose, so those need to go back to be spent on that specific purpose. We did do an audit going back even further than what this shows, but this kind of really tells without getting too many years in here to make it confusing, but you can kind of see that this is about $3,800 of underspent of this donation over the last 7 years. And so we went back even to 2010 to make sure that that was the case, and it is. So as far as COPA budget options, you can change the TLT allocation through ordinance and Muni Code to amend within the ORS guidelines. So we are super specific as far as what we allocate our TLT monies to. You can be less specific or you can change that, but that would need to be a change in the municipal code because our municipal code defines where we are supposed to allocate these funds to. You could allocate other general fund money. You could force a program to change their budget allocation. So Downtown Development Services, they currently budget about $10,000 for art maintenance. So you could move some of that around. Economic Development Services, this is why I have question marks on these bullets. If there was an artwork maybe that created some kind of economic draw, maybe it would go into that program. Parks, if you were placing some kind of artwork in the parks, that you would make them spend that money there. Tourism, this one's a little gray area here, but in the ORS, there is a publicizing welcoming tourists definition in there. So maybe it would be like a mural or something that is welcoming tourists as far as the artwork. But as far as going further as just a piece of art, it doesn't necessarily get defined as an eligible use how we read it in the ORS. So in the tourism program, the next kind of considerations of if we look at a projection of if we get all of our budgeted revenues and approximately spend what we budget, there's going to be about a $145,000 excess in the program. And looking at this and with the recent pandemic and not knowing what TLT revenue will always bring in, there's talk about potentially creating a 6-month reserve that we may grow to alleviate those swings and make sure that we can staff and pay for the things that tourism needs. So for the fiscal year 23 budget, there's about $200,000 for wages, benefits, direct and indirect charges. So that would be paying for the staff time, which is approximately $100,000, or that 101,700 number there. So of the 145, we would still have about 35,000, if not more, for grant opportunities. And in talking with Brad too, like if we did have a down year, we could use that reserve to continue funding grants and not necessarily just city staff time. That way you can alleviate that potential swing of only having 35,000 one year and then, oh, great, now we only have 10. And it limits the opportunities from people on the outside. So a call to action is at your discretion. There are some alternatives here for the TAC and staff to prepare a formal recommendation for the non-DMO tourism spending for the balance of fiscal year 23 and 24. Direct staff to prepare tourism grant guidelines, and then council could choose not to proceed with any changes at this time. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions for JC before we have the Tourism Advisory Committee members speak? Val?
Yeah, that was a lot of information that went through really, really fast. So I did have a couple of them. I'm looking at the downtown development services and where it says currently budgets for art maintenance for $10,000. When was that put in the budget? Do you
That's
remember?
new this year.
That's what I thought. Okay,
Because
that's what I
they
just- okay.
previously did not plan for that, and then
Yes.
some artwork started getting damaged, and it started doing the, we need to start planning for this.
Okay, that's what I thought. I thought it was recent, so I was making sure. And I was wondering whether it has been utilized at this point in time.
I don't know if we've physically spent that yet, but the plan is to do ongoing maintenance for some of these pieces of art.
So will that be $10,000 annually that goes into that?
It could be more, right?
Okay.
Depending on, I think this is also new, that we just threw a number that we thought it would be. And so again, whatever is damaged or needs maintenance could be more, could be less in any given year.
Okay, and then I have another question too. Down on the next steps consideration, you went through that really fast, and so I'm assuming there's $145,000 that you're predicting is currently above what would go to the DMO, correct? And then I was reading down here, staff recommends maintain a reserve. So you're saying that we should put a reserve back to keep it steady through the years. I get that. And it says fiscal year 23 budget, 203 is allocated for wages, benefits, and direct charges. So I'm wondering where those wages, who gets paid through those? That's what I'm just trying to find that out.
I have all that information right here. So 8% of the CD director, 50% of the economic development assistant, and then there are wages and benefits for my time, city manager's office, legal, IT, all the things that it takes to.
So every department basically has those same, I think there's a name for it or something, that's the indirect charge, that it covers it, okay.
Yep.
I wanted to know that. I also want to go back to the COPA, the Art in Motion, where we were talking about the public making the donation for Art in Motion every year, and I'm assuming that bus decals, so the money, so they spent less, am I correct? The annual net is what was left over, am I correct?
That is just the annual net, not a running total.
Okay, so you say that adds up. So my question on that is, you were saying since it wasn't spent, does that the $7,677? Okay. I
That's
just
what's
wanted
left
to
over
confirm.
after 12-ish years.
Okay, so it is actually there and to be used for, is it only art in motion or can it be used for other things?
It's only for Art in Motion because that is what the grant or the donation is specifically for.
So my question to you is if they went back to the Art in Motion to Republic Services, that's who makes that donation, is there any way that that can be used for
Yeah,
art in other ways?
So not as it was gifted, no. Because then I couldn't financially say like 2010, can you guys retroactively change this? Doesn't
So
seem
what I'm
right.
asking is where did it go? I mean, did it go just absorbed into the budget? So is that's what I'm trying to say, is if we didn't spend it and it was sitting there, did it just get absorbed into the city's budget or did Republic get that money back?
Nope, we have it. It's restricted in its use and it just keeps getting carried over year to year. So there is an actual defined accounting line to
Okay.
keep track of that money.
Okay, but you're saying at this point in time, you wouldn't want to go back, I can understand 2010, but if they, I guess I'm just saying, if that money's there, how is it ever going to be used? If they keep, that's my point, I guess, if it was,
Right,
if it
and
was
so we
designated
did-
as an art.
We did have a meeting and with our staff liaison with them asking if they could talk to Republic Service and maybe donate for another reason or another piece of art or something. But as it was gifted to us, financially, I have to spend it the way somebody intended
Yes,
for us to spend it, right? So if somebody gave us a $1,000 check for our canine units, I would need to make sure that I spend that on the canines and not necessarily just in a generic donation line.
Yeah, and I totally understand that, but I'm just saying if it's sitting in there and it's supposed to be used for art in motion and, you know, at some point in time, that doesn't go, does that mean that just sits in there forever or is there a way, that's what I'm saying, is there a way to retroactively go back and say, okay, this money was designated, this was the money that was used, can we at this point in time take that and put it towards another artistic as long as it was into the arts?
I'm sure we could probably ask them for future donations to be less restrictive with it, but it's hard because you're commingling $2010, $2011, $2012 that were given for a specific purpose. People have changed over throughout, not only here at the city, but at Republic Services as well.
course, yeah.
So we'd have to make some contact and figure out what they would want to do because I don't feel in my best accounting kind of judgment that we could make that assumption without doing it.
Okay, that's my question. And then the only other questions or comments, and I don't know if comments maybe later, but I do know that on some of these definitions, strategic planning, I know you mentioned that, I happen to know that the DMO has done their own strategic planning, so that came out of their budget. And that's because it's under tourism promotion. I think you mentioned something about we could do that, and I thought to myself that I know that is actually taking place with the DMO at this point, as is the researching the effectiveness of events. They're also doing a lot of measuring. So I just want everybody to know that that's part of what they are doing.
Correct, and it's, the way I mentioned it is what we are available to spend it on, so we can do it above and beyond the DMO per ORS.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Joel?
I just had a quick question. On the slide 19, it talked about the list of city tourism-related facilities, and it had just 3 facilities, and it was the Welcome Center, the Reinhardt Volunteer Park, and Riverside Park. And as I heard you say that, I was thinking of other facilities that, in my mind anyway, were tourism-related facilities. The first one I thought of was like Dollar Mountain Park, and I'm sure there's others that we can think of. What's the criteria that we use for that? And is this the list?
I don't think this is the list, this is more of examples, but we would need to make sure that it meets section 9B, that it is at least a 10-year, and Dollar Mountain would definitely qualify. I know it's kind of under construction right now, so that's probably why it's not on the list.
Okay, thank you.
Rick?
CJ, on that 50-mile limit, I realize the purpose of that is to fill the hotels, but also this last weekend, we observed the restaurants are just doing a booming business with the activity that's going on. So if there is advertising for Josephine County, how does that happen, and then how does it appear in the balance sheet? In other words,
Yeah, but
is prohibiting advertising to Jackson County for different events?
yeah, so if you ask people around the state from different finance directors, like the city of Ashland, Oregon Shakespearean Festival is such a big draw that they'll get people within 50 miles too, but it'll translate into overnight stays. So they may get people from Medford even staying in their transient lodging tax, which is why they assume the definition of just an overnight stay and not necessarily assume the 50 miles.
So then that doesn't fit within the parameters for the transit lodging tax. How does advertising occur for a community that's close?
Right, and so that's part of the crux of if you wanted to go by the letter of the ORS, you would need to have those advertisements be at least 50 miles away, right, to meet that criteria. But I think what other people are finding, right, like people from Grants Pass, which is within 50 miles, will go to Ashland for that event and potentially stay overnight. So it's a kind of a weird, ambiguous gray area depending on how big your event is. And I think other people around the state are doing similar things. So like the city of Albany that I come from, Northwest Art and Air, is a huge air balloon festival.
Okay, thank you.
People close by get to see that Salem where they may stay in Albany still.
Kurt?
JC, from the lodging tax collected, can you make an inference to the occupancy rate for this last summer? Or Tori, is that something that you track?
We can see it in the uptick in revenues or downtick. We haven't gotten the summer's remittance yet. And so that'll be one of the first things I think they're all due by October 31st. And so I'll be able to start figuring out if we had a good summer or not.
Can you, obviously the Hampton is our newest lodging. Can you speak to the impact that it's had on our lodging rates? Can you quantify its contribution?
Not yet, because we had such a large uptick in COVID because we were actually open when other areas weren't. And so we had a huge influx. And so I think it's going to take a while to see if there is a true direct correlation. And maybe Tori has better data that I don't have other than just seeing the revenues come through.
Can we put you on the spot?
Kurt, just so you know, I was going to have Tori and Doug both speak later, but does anybody else have any questions for JC? Okay, go ahead, Tori.
Okay, I'll just tailor this very specifically to your question, Councilor Collins, of the uptick in TLT may not specifically be occupancy, because the revenue, that average daily rate that we're charging per night is significantly higher than it has been over past years. So what I've heard from hoteliers anecdotally and looking at some of the data that I'm shared with by our partner at Travel Southern Oregon is our occupancy this year is actually slightly lower than it was last year. And that 2021 was the most banner year of tourism here, exceeding 2019 after the blip of 2020. What's making up that difference is exactly that average daily rate that we're charging more per room than we ever used to. And then, so the other metric that you would be looking for is referred to as RevPAR, which is revenue per available room. Is that right, Terry? Okay, yeah. So there's kind of three numbers that we're really tracking. Occupancy is important because we want our hotels full. However, what I've heard from hoteliers is with some of the staffing issues, being slightly less occupancy was kind of a breath of fresh air because they're still making the revenues that they intended to make. So sorry, the numbers on here are really small. What I can say is this is comparing August 22 to 21. Is that for Josephine County, occupancy was about 75.7%. In 21, it was 76.9, so it's not off by a lot. Comparing that to the average daily rate, this year we were charging $119 about per room, and last year was $128. But the revenue per room is pretty similar, between $90 per room and $99 for year over year. So those kind of three numbers all intertwine. It's not necessarily tracking one over the other, but it's kind of looking at that holistic picture. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, who's your question for?
I think it's for our city staff.
Okay.
So we're a policy board. We have committees. We, in the past, have not given budgets to committees for purchasing. I can see where a lot of committees would want that in terms of the tree committee, the historic commission, the COPA, and they do good work. I mean, what we just experienced this last week was good. Tree committee does good work. Parks committee. There's just a little red flag in my bureaucracy that raises in the back of my mind in terms of purchasing, following purchasing regs, appropriate use, non-elected officials, accountability, all those kind of things. And you laid that out in the manual on the controls. Could you ascertain about how that applies to, that policy would apply to other committees, and what dangers are there or benefits are there associated with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you want your committees to be passionate about what they're doing and what they want to instill in their community. The issue is potentially a non-city representative aligning an agreement without the city knowing that they are aligning an agreement with. So basically a committee member would be shopping or finding something without direction or even involvement of staff and resources, which has the purchasing authority, which actually has the approval authority to spend money. So that's where potentially that kind of walking too fast, too far before the proper channels are kind of gone through. Does that answer your question in the sense that, like, yes, we want people to do the work, we want people to solicit for donations and things, because we have funding issues and people are passionate about those things.
So if I understood what you said, the only red flag you would see is on any of the committees, if they went with a non-city entity and allocated money without the knowledge of the city, that could be a problem.
Correct. And or we have federal guidelines, state guidelines that they may not know that we have to abide by in certain dollar
or procurement
Yeah,
procedures.
that's an important point from a procurement perspective. Oregon Revised Statutes has you as ultimate procurement authority. You designate through the charter also procurement authority to the city manager, and that's where it lies. It lies between council, ultimately adopting the budget, allocating the resources, and then the city manager within purchasing authority has the ability to purchase and spend based on council direction. Those are the two parties only that have any kind of purchasing authority.
I feel like we're kind of getting down a rabbit hole here. I think maybe the question that we've been talking about is potentially establishing a grant program. You know, then people would submit an application to the committee and they would review whether, you know, their event met that criteria, and then the staff would write the check. So hopefully nobody's going out and buying their own crayons or whatever. So any other questions at the moment? All right. Let's get Doug up here and let us know what the tourism committee has been talking about as far as how they see their role going forward.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, Mayor Bristol and council members. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for that presentation, city staff. It was great and well received. We see our effectiveness in 3 different ways moving forward. They've all kind of been talked about, but I'm going to try to put them into a capsule for you today. The first one I want to talk about is event support, and that is through a grant program that would be administered by the Tourism Advisory Committee. We would make recommendations to the council as to what grants would be submitted, how much they would be submitted for, but the Tourism Advisory Committee would do all the work of vetting the organization as to their qualifying for tourism dollars. The next one that we see would be effective would be a potential feasibility study. And the reason I have kind of talked about the feasibility study is we have neighbors that are on the move when it comes to tourism. They're bolstering their assets at a pretty rapid rate. We're a brand new organization, and I think it would be worthwhile to have a third party come in and assess our situation, compare us to our competitors, and the goal would be to become competitive in our region to the neighbors that are surrounding us, but also complementary. One of the things I would say, and we hear about it all the time, is our tremendous downtown that we have. I think that we have a leg up on our competitors when it comes to that, and I think with the right guidance, we could use this to pull all of our assets together and anchor them into our downtown, which is not really being done to a high level with any of the other DMOs around. The other thing is helping local organizations with their ability to, if they're not already a tourism asset, help them become one. Some examples I can think of. We have a BMX track that has been built at the southernmost on-ramp here into Grants Pass. That's a regional, possibly a national qualifier venue. So my question to the Tours Advisory Committee would, how would we go out and get a hold of that individual and say, well, you know, I need bleachers that'll seat 1,000 people, we can only seat 50. Well, we may come to the council with that and say, hey, if we spent this money on bleachers, this would qualify this venue to be able to pull in these organizations and bring people lit from miles around to race in BMX and stay in hotels and to spend the money in our local retail shops. Another one that comes to mind is that one of our local Rotary organizations is talking about bringing an event here in 2025. With the amount of time we could potentially prepare the things that they're going to need, and there is some infrastructure opportunity there. Without getting into or even knowing the details about what they would require, this is a conversation that we as an organization, Tourism Advisory Committee and Visit Grants Pass, would want to know about, so that we can kind of start assisting them in how we can be prepared and provide all of the assets that they need. Much like, you know, when the Olympics go into a city, I'm not suggesting the Olympics are going to come here, but they have to prepare years in advance for that to happen. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now from the standpoint of where we are with tourism. You know, we pretty much have the marketing, promotion, dialed in with that infrastructure. Now we just need to look at what we can do with our downtown, tying our assets together, pushing them into shoulder seasons, and kind of bringing that information to the council and then seeing what we can do with it. And one of the things I would leave you with, and since I've been coming before you guys, this has kind of been, you know, what I've talked about. We have this opportunity right now. You know, we've just started a brand new DMO, a year old. We're exactly pacing with where we hoped that we would be. We're having great success. We just want to make sure that we're backing that up with our potential assets, giving our vendors all that they can, all the support that we can give them to make sure that we are becoming we want to be the most desirable tourist destination in Southern Oregon, and we need help with that as far as understanding what that would be. People coming in from outside that maybe haven't had just the view of Grants Pass, but they've looked through the whole country and they know what works and what doesn't. And that's what we're hoping for. And again, the goal is to not only create an amazing tourism environment, but to improve local livability at the same time. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Any questions? Joel?
So Doug, then I would take it you're in favor of a grant program for promoting art?
I'm for a grant program for supporting local businesses and events, as long as they qualify under the code. That's the big portion. And we want to assist with people that are putting on events, and there's ways that we can do that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Val?
Yes, thank you, Doug. I have a question. So basically, when you're talking about the feasibility study, you're talking about feasibility in terms of assets and doing a kind of a comparison and looking at our assets in locally Grants Pass compared to what's around the area and seeing which ones we could help. Is that also, would that be leaning towards the grant system too, or is that a completely different thing?
I would see that as being different. And as it stands now, just to be clear, the Tourism Advisory Committee has reviewed some proposals, but it has not been voted on as a goal that we present to the council yet. These are just some of the things that we're talking about as far as our ability to keep the ball rolling forward when it comes to tourism assets and how we can, just compete and complement Southern Oregon in that way.
Vanessa?
Thank you, Doug. Can you talk about how a feasibility study and a demand generator study differ from each other, or are they the same?
Well, I think a demand generator focus mostly on just the generators that we currently have. One of the presentations that we saw was it was the one I liked because he talked about a lot of plans being fragmented, and you've got people working on this and people working on that and how you can tie them all together. So the feasibility study, and again, without having, picked a specific route to go, the feasibility study would not only be, examining demand generators, but how to pull them together and tie them and anchor them into the downtown or whatever we consider to be our main asset.
Do you see the feasibility study to be more of a holistic approach rather than the demand generator is more siloed?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions at the moment? Kurt?
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but how do the properties that you're involved in, how does their occupancy rate compare with what Grants Pass is experiencing?
Our hotels have a tendency to do pretty well because they're branded hotels. Best Western, Holiday Inn Express are the ones I work with. So you're asking me how they compare with other hotels?
With what we're doing here?
Well, the reason I'm here is it's part of my job to kind of increase lodging and people coming into Grants Pass, and I have 2 properties that would benefit greatly from all of the work that's being done here. So that's kind of my tie-in and why we have hotels at the table, why we have all the people, all the stakeholders at the table that we do.
I'll just throw one comment also on the presentation. You showed Redmond and listed some tourist properties, but it didn't mention Eagle Crest Golf Resort, which is a pretty huge draw for Redmond. Just mentioning.
Joel?
So, I haven't kept close tabs on the DMO or the Tourism Advisory Board committee. So I was wondering, I would be interested in your opinion and also Valerie's opinion. Are the 2 entities synergistic? Or are they competitive? Because I see some duplicate roles and duplicate things happening. But so are they synergistic, those 2 organizations, or are they competitive?
They're synergistic. We are working on ways to move forward and not be duplicative. That's kind of why we're here today, is to try to resolve that.
Any other? Val?
I was just wondering if you wanted us, because I'm not on the Tourism Advisory Committee. I am a liaison but I also know that there are several members on both that kind of intertwine between the 2, and I think they have been synergistic, thank you, synergetic in what I have seen and watched in my actions.
Okay. And then I assume, Vanessa, your opinion would be the same. They're synergistic and not competitive.
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Terry, did you have anything to add for the committee? No. Tori, do you have any ideas you'd like to share about just how the role of the committee could be different than the DMO?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing that kind of goes back to that question about synergistic and competitive. I don't think they're competing, but I do think the committee is in this retraining phase of like, we've done this for years, which is watch over the marketing that was invested in by a contractor. And it's like, all right, well, that's happening at our organization, and I bring updates into the committee. So how do we bring along this committee of like, how can we use the TLT money? What are the opportunities in the community? So I think we're at this like retraining phase of the committee of how they look forward for that long-term investment for visitation industry here. And unless I have more questions, that's kind of how I view it.
Well, I know the role of the DMO is specifically marketing. Mm-hmm. So where do you drop off and what's left? Because I think not everybody maybe, has the depth of understanding that you do, obviously, with what else is there related to tourism development that you're not doing?
Yeah, so we have exactly that. We are the marketing agency, so most of our budget's going to marketing. We do have an AmeriCorps Rare Placement stationed with us this year, who is working hard on kind of connecting the development opportunities, working in the city, but as well as the greater Josephine County, as we know that those assets out in the county are really important to the visitor experience who stay in our hotels here as well. And that is, people know Jacksonville is the gateway to the Applegate Valley. Do they realize that we are the other bookend and that other gateway into that great valley of farm and agriculture and wine? Same thing with the Illinois Valley. They have their own community groups that are doing the work, and we are trying to figure out that AmeriCorps placement can add some extra capacity to them. But also, when those businesses and opportunities are ready for marketing, how do we pull that information and get them as part of the greater storytelling of Grants Pass and the greater county? And also knowing what interests people, what people click on, the things that do well in our marketing, and trying to see what interests visitors and our target audiences might also bring up conversations with the communities and community-based organizations doing the work of like, hey, we're seeing a demand here, or we're seeing a demand here, or even just bringing up our number one visitor from out of state is California. They just passed a bill that they're only going to allow electric vehicles by a certain year. Do we have enough EV stations to service this visitor who's our number one audience? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking for and trying to help sit at the table. I don't always bring the capacity to get the work done, but help advise and say how that can plug into our marketing to make sure that they are represented. If that answered your question.
Okay, and then as far as we've kind of talked about this idea of smaller grants for marketing, is there a role for marketing for specific events that isn't covered by your organization?
Yeah, I think so. So for example, the city of Medford actually has an event-specific grant, and the event promoter may not actually have to spend it on marketing. Maybe they want to increase the amount of tickets they sell, but they can't do that unless they invest in, 10 more outhouses or something. And so they could apply for a grant so that they can expand their footprint year over year, and if they can provide a larger footprint and bring more audience, then potentially that's more hotel rooms. So the grant program, I think, would be a really big discussion of is it only giving marketing money to our entities that are doing events or building things, or is it allowing them the money to actually expand or grow or add a level of infrastructure to help improve and enhance that visitor experience?
That seems like a good question. Mm-hmm. And maybe we need to have JC touch on that because it seems like our hands are more limited.
That is correct. So per the ORS and where this would reside-ish, and you can change where the grant comes from, but if the grant comes out of the tourism program, it needs to be spent on marketing because that's how the ORS reads. However, if you did the grant out of the general fund, there would be no qualifications as to where the grant needed to be spent at. And I think a lot of the other cities around the state, they try and use general fund money, so that way it gives the capacity for the event to do whatever they need to either grow it or whatever expenditures they may have.
Okay, but for this particular pot of money, it would need to be people from 50 miles away and an overnight stay.
Correct.
Okay. Terry, was that your hand? Okay, pop up.
While Terry's coming up too, I do want to clarify that ORS defines a visitor as someone outside 50 miles or books a hotel room. So it's an either or.
Thanks, that was Terry's answer, maybe. All right, so if we have a Citizens of Grants Pass, test your local hotel weekend, we could spend the money, right? All right, any other questions? Nope. Val?
I just, and I guess it's JC, I just want clarification exactly on what exact money, I mean, because there's tourism promotion, there's tourism facilities. So I just want clarification on what aspect of that money we're dealing with. Because the promotion, I would imagine, goes to the DMO, correct?
Yeah, so this is what, can you hear me now? So this is where, if you look at this slide again, I forget what number it is, but the
25.
tourism promotion is the tourism program within the general fund, and of that 40%, so 28% is spent on the DMO out of that area.
Out of the 40%, 28% is on the DMO. Am I correct? And so that's what we're talking about, the amount that's not?
Correct.
Between the 28 and 40.
Yeah, so that
Okay.
12% gap right there,
Okay.
that is the city's portion.
Okay, and that is why you're saying specifically that needs to be promotion, because it is under the promotion part of it.
That is
Thank you.
correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Joel?
So then is the proposal to have the grants be part of the promotional or part of the, or under the facility? I'm getting confused.
And that's part of the direction I think we're looking for, is how you want this grant to.
So if it's funded by lodging tax dollars, it has to be one of those two or a combination thereof. And if it's general fund dollars, then there's no restrictions.
That is correct. And so the current plan or excess of revenues is in the promotion side. And so the grant program potentially would need to look at marketing dollars that we could give to these events.
So then that leads to the next question is, if it is in the promotion, as a promotion grant, how useful is that for 50 miles away? And the exception that Terry and you talked about. How useful would that be?
Well, let's give an example. Tori, you can come up. So let's pick a couple of our local events. We have, we just had the Chalk Art Festival this past weekend. We have Back to the 50s. We have a Native American powwow on Mother's Day. What would your organization do for any of those events? And is there space for them to do something on their own if they had some money?
Yeah, I would say there's probably room for both, because anything we market will have our brand and go to our URL, which is then, of course, could easily bounce to the event promoter. But some of these events, usually if they're tight on budget or things increase, like the cost of restrooms or staff to run the event, usually the number one thing that's cut is marketing. That's usually the first line that goes. And so providing this dedicated money that they have to spend in this way, of course, with some of the parameters around 50 miles and that sort of thing, it would allow them to expand their own marketing or even start some of their own marketing channels. And then also being here in this year, what I've watched is different events being able to feeling like or knowing how to even ask for TLT money throughout this year. And if there was a grant and a program that was clear and in place, we might have new events and things coming through who didn't know there was a structure of which they could ask for this too. And then decreasing that liability from council of well, this event got this money, but this one said no, and this said this, and that if there was a formal program and a structure, it would help everyone in this room be able to better allocate in a way that's following ORS and also serving our community and the event promoters or whoever you choose to qualify to do what they do and under their own brands and their own voice as well. And it may not be an event like a music festival. It could be triathlon, anything like that too that also comes through that could potentially try for extra funds.
Rob.
So could any of these groups or organizations, if they were to acquire extra funding, and maybe they don't have infrastructure or experience with marketing particularly, they might just have a passion for their event. Could they come to you at that point and contract you to do marketing for them?
Yeah, I think they could. It'll get a little easier when maybe we have a little more staff and capacity for that. But I think yes, or we could help sit down and advise, especially from that lens of if they're concerned of spending it correctly on that 50 miles, can I help them identify a target audience? And then they can sit there and program the money how they want to program it.
Because mostly what I see with groups like that, they have a tremendous passion, maybe for decades or lifetimes for whatever their thing is, and they have no idea how to promote it. They love it and they'll put it on a great event. So they potentially could partner with you and use your expertise. It might be the best way to use the money.
Exactly, yeah, and we'd be happy to help and sit down with anyone, especially any grant awardee that's like, okay, these are very specific ways we can spend it, we're unsure where to go forward. We're happy to do that.
Other questions? All right, tapped out of questions at the moment. All right, so we have a couple of different questions, I guess, before us today to talk about, so that's partly why this might be a little confusing, but we need to discuss what, if any, role the Tourism Committee will have going forward. We need to think about whether we want to establish a tourism marketing grant program and how that might play out. And also we did cover, Brad covered, or I guess JC covered the COPA dollars, which is maybe somewhat of a different discussion altogether, but a COPA grant program, because that's something that they've also talked about, but it's seems, at least in my mind, a little different now than tourism. At one point we were talking about that maybe being a tourism draw with the art, but we have such specific requirements for those tourism dollars that there may not be a lot of overlap there. Anyway, does somebody have thoughts? Vanessa?
Not to put you on the spot, Cal, but the COPA chair is here today. I wasn't sure if you wanted to speak on the COPA portion of this.
Did you want to talk to us, Cal? Okay. If you want to, sure. I'm not sure it is.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Cal Kenny. I'm the chair of the COPA committee. Just some thoughts. So I'm under the understanding by listening that the lodging tax money could not be used for public art. Is that it?
Yeah, we have two pots of money. One is to promote tourists. There may be some interaction there. It's tricky, I guess, with art. And then the other one is for facilities, but it needs to be more structural than like a sculpture.
Okay, because they're going to ask me, okay. First of all, the people on the COPA committee are very creative. You know, you've got some, they come up with ideas and different things. It's good to encourage those people to be able to follow through with their ideas. And there's been some discussion at our meetings, and there's a couple people on the committee that are really delving into studies that prove the economic plus for art. And if you're interested, we have a meeting tomorrow night. I can even bring that up and we could, pass along. Other communities have spent money from the tourism dollars on public art. I mean, and there's been some studies that show the positive effects. And you talked about the art maintenance. Well, that's the big deal. We have been talking about that in the committee and there's two things there, the money, of course, and spending the money. And we found it's not as easy as it sounds, because to find individuals that are qualified to do this and want to do this and will do it for the amount of money that you have, it's a challenge, okay? Fortunately, we do have a person right now, and we've done the salmon on the pedestrian bridge is completed. But it's not cheap, I think that was $500, okay? So we're in a position to follow through more on that now. And it's been a goal for us like quite a few years. And there's one more thing, and this is a gray area, and it's come up at our committee, is if somebody was to earmark or give us money or give the city money or give the city money to be spent on public art, donate, say, hey, we're going to give you $2,000. There's got to be hopefully we could find a channel that person could actually do that, you know what I mean? And have anyway, it's be unfortunate if we say, oh, no, we can't spend your money because we don't have an avenue for doing it, you know, because we don't have a budget, which is right. We understand we're just a committee, but that's one of those areas. Are there any questions?
Does anyone have questions?
Okay.
I think there is a way to use some tourism dollars towards art. If art were to become, if we were to market, you know, Grants Pass art as a draw,
Yes.
you know, we might not be able to spend it on creating the art, but we could spend it on promoting people to come here and look at the art.
Yeah, I understand.
So-
Well, we're in a process right now of working with making a art walk map. You know, that's
Exactly.
something might fit in there. You know.
That
Yeah.
might fit in
And
there.
then not just the physical, we could even move it on, you know, and toward, okay. Okay, thank you.
But we also, just so you know, there is kind of a separate discussion about just how we might fund art projects. And I don't know if we want to jump into that today totally, since it seems like tourism's probably going to be enough, but that is another conversation. Brian?
So it sounds like we have a few topics here, and I feel like it'd be easier if we just went one by one as opposed to trying to hit them all at once. There's the Tourism Advisory Committee purpose, there's COPA grants, there's grants for tourism. So just, I think it'd be easier if we picked one and finished that and then moved on to the next one.
I agree, but I know that people like to talk about whatever they like to talk about. So who wants to start? Where's a logical place? Do you want to talk about the committee role first?
Sure.
Joel?
So if I understand to facilitate this discussion so we don't have to keep going on and try to be efficient in our discussion. Purpose of the Tourism Advisory Committee is to encourage visitors and residents to engage in community activities while enhancing the positive image of our city through marketing, promotions, and destination management. There's somewhat of an overlap there. They review and advise the work of the city's tourism contractor. That obviously isn't done anymore. Included reporting findings and recommendations to the council as needed. So that was the purpose of the Tourism Advisory Committee. So if we go forward with the Tourism Advisory Committee, what is their purpose? And so I am not the right person to do this, but I'm going to make a stab just so that you folks can correct it, okay? Purpose of the Tourism Advisory Committee is to encourage visitors and residents to engage in community activities while enhancing the positive image of our city through coordination with the DMO and the City Council and the citizens. Gee, that's about it, I guess, isn't it? That's what I heard. Anyway, go ahead, Rick.
Rick?
Well, before you go, the other thing that I heard, or no, that I know is sometimes when groups outgrow or outlive their purpose, they still exist. And so the federal government's great at that. And so you got a lot of committees that exist that no longer serve a purpose and get funding or engage time, staff time, and that kind of thing. So that happens too. And just throwing them out there, not saying that that's happening here, but at some point in time, there are committees that go by the wayside. Go ahead, Rick.
So the comment was stated that there's a synergy between the Tourism Advisory Committee and the DMO, and I feel on that basis I would be supportive of maintaining the status quo. Thank you.
Valerie?
as you stated, Joel, I think that the purpose of the TAC is to encourage visitors and residents to engage in community activities while enhancing the positive image of our city. We could just mark out through marketing, promotions, destination. I think where we go next is, are they going to, come up with a vetting process to help move things forward? So I think in a way, you almost have to go to the second, what do we want them to do? Because we're not asking them to market. We're not asking them necessarily to promote, because that's obviously the DMO. Destination management, I also feel, is DMO. I think what I see as their goal is in vetting community activities and that sort of thing. So maybe you keep the purpose pretty short and sweet. You don't have to list everything. And then when we go talking about how we're going to come up with this grant thing or whatever, that is what they're doing, engaging in community activities, enhancing positive image. So I think you just keep their purpose short and sweet and then move on to the discussion on, what are you going to ask them to do?
Rob?
Yeah, so basically the Tourism Advisory Committee is about refining the product, so to speak, and the DMO is about marketing the product. So something along the lines of the Tourism Advisory Committee's purpose would be to identify and improve local attractions that can be marketable as tourist activities. And I think that the Tourism Advisory Committee can actually ask specifically, or they can work with the DMO and ask the DMO, gee, what do you see here that you think is marketable, or that can, or that you'd like to market, or that your opinion, or that the feedback that you've gotten would indicate is a valuable attraction. So basically, the Tourism Advisory Committee is to identify and improve local attractions or local attraction activities that will be marketable to the tourist, to be marketable to tourists. So they're about developing the product. They have nothing to do with marketing the product. They're about improving and developing the product. And they can work with the DMO if they want to refine that wording.
Rick?
So this last week, a lot of us went to the League of Oregon Cities, and one of the comments was made there is community involvement. And I see with having the Tourism Advisory Committee, you get the community involved, so people in the community they feel ownership. And I think that can be a real plus. Thank you.
That's cool.
Brian?
I like what Rob had to say. I think that the TAC is in a, they're kind of retooling and they're shifting right now since the DMO's up and running. So I would like us to give them, some better focus. And I think Rob's idea about identifying and improving attractions and assets would be a good direction for that committee. And to add on to what Rob said, I think that, identifying and improving those could be anything from, a natural asset, a privately held asset, a city held asset, a county held asset. I don't think we necessarily need to be too specific in what those assets are. And honestly, some of those assets don't exist yet. So the tourist committee could recommend potential future assets that the city could invest in. As Rick said, we were all at the League of Oregon Cities conference in Bend, and I think we all saw that Bend has invested a lot of money in their tourism-related facilities as it relates to the city infrastructure itself, their park system, their bike system, the beautification of their downtown. So there's a lot of money that they've invested in tourism-related facilities that aren't necessarily a building or a facility per se, but cumulatively, all these little things add up to make a city more attractive to tourists from far away to come visit. So I would think in addition to a grant program for events, having them vet those applications and provide recommendations. Also, giving us recommendations on existing tourism-related facilities that could be bolstered and strengthened, and recommending potential new tourist-related facilities. Even something as small as downtown public water fountains could potentially be seen as a tourist-related facility. So I don't want us to put too much of a box around what a tourism-related facility could be, because those little things, when you put them all together, add up to more people coming to our town.
Joel, then DJ.
So then, the purpose of the Tourism Advisory Committee is to encourage visitors and residents to engage in community activities while identifying and improving assets and activities for local attractions. Period. And then part of that could be they could review the grants.
Okay, DJ?
Yeah, I think that's pretty well defined. Rob, I think you described it very well. I think there's now an understood difference between the two organizations. In reading this, there's a clear desire from the Tourism Advisory Committee with plenty of ideas and therefore potential benefits. I would encourage those experts to prepare those recommendations for non-DMO tourism spending, perhaps even including the grant guidelines if necessary. We know we have the TLT and the general fund, and I would be keen to ideas from the Tourism Advisory Committee to utilize general fund dollars that might fit and might not fit exactly well with TLT. So I'm willing to just let the Tourism Advisory Committee and the experts on that board to prepare a plan and present to us. I think that the difference between the DMO and the Tourism Advisory Committee are demonstrably clear at this point, and I think it's the time to allow those experts to do the work.
Just to make sure I understand you clearly, you're suggesting that we do move forward with a grant program and that we have the committee write out the details of the program and present that back to council?
Yeah, the stronger of the two suggestions would be to have the Tourism Advisory Committee prepare recommendations for non-DMO tourism spending. And the softer of the two would be the grant guidelines, if that's deemed to be necessary. It seems to be that there's a general understanding, but Tori explained it pretty well, that if we do have a structured guideline, it would take some ambiguity about utilizing those grants.
Okay. Further discussion? All right, well, DJ had just suggested that we have the committee work on those two programs, I guess filling in some details. And is everybody good with that? Yes? Okay, Brian?
Just to clarify, the two programs being a grant program recommendation, and then what was the second?
I would say identifying
And improving
assets.
assets. And activities.
Assets and activities, okay. So I guess kind of what I have here in a nutshell as far as their mission statement too, because we're rewriting that a little bit too, but we'll have to get somebody to put together some final wording here, but something like the purpose of the Tourism Advisory Committee is to encourage visitors and residents to engage in community activities while enhancing the positive image of our city. Or we could take out while enhancing the positive image, but then to identify and improve local attractions and activities that can be marketable to tourists.
Assets and activities.
Assets and activities, maybe instead of attractions, assets and activities. I know that Karen's getting all this for me, sir. So they'll put it into something that seems a little less mumbo jumbo and have us come back at it. But does that seem like a reasonable first draft to everybody? Okay. And we can have the committee maybe refine that a little bit as well. Do we have an understanding of what we're doing here, Aaron?
We do. We've got the spirit of what council's discussing. We will, based on what the mayor just mentioned, we can take and wordsmith what you've talked about in the dais, bring it forward to Tourism Advisory Committee, have them take a look, and then bring something forward to you at a business meeting under, on either council consent or council action.
Sounds all really good to me. How about you? Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that that's about the purpose. Are we also going forward with the grant? Part of it, did we separate
I mean,
that?
maybe we should talk a little bit more about that since we haven't covered the
Yes.
grant, but
Yeah.
go for it. You want to start?
Well, I just want to say that I also agree with the grant funding and having them work towards putting together a structured format of how they could be vetted to come forward that would go along with the ORS as well. You know, as far as the general fund goes, I think that that's kind of what we do with our strategic planning. So I think I would feel more comfortable about going through with the grant funding part with the money that we're from tourism, and then keeping it in a different pocket, that general fund money coming through the strategic planning. So if they had, like if they wanted to come up, say, with a feasibility study, come through that, perhaps with the, and I don't know if that has to be tourism money or if that would come general fund, but anything out of the general fund per se, go through the strategic planning process.
So I think I was thinking we were talking specifically about marketing grants. Is that
Yes, that's what I'm
you're
talking about.
Is
Yeah,
that what
that's what I was
everybody's
talking
talking
about,
about?
the granting, yes.
Okay. Did you have something, Rick? Okay, I was gonna have JC, I'm trying to find the page here. You said, I want to say it was ballpark 159,000. 32, thank you. Okay, 32, page 16. Okay, anticipated to have around 145,000 more than what's going to the DMO for this 1 year?
That is
Okay.
correct.
And staff is recommending that we take a portion of that and create a reserve, and because that was a particularly good year and they might not always be so good. Okay, so at this point, we're having the committee talk about a framework for the grant. I guess, do we want to talk about how much money you would potentially be interested in allocating to that program? Brian, then Val?
Well, based on the information presented, it sounds like this year, there would potentially be $35,000, and so it would probably vary by year depending on how much revenue comes in. And this year, I would guess, is probably an average to maybe a slightly above average year for tourism. So I would certainly want it to be under that amount. I don't know, 15, 20,000, 25,000.
Is that the right number, JC, that 35?
Yeah, so this is me and Brad kicking around dollars too of how much participation are we going to get from the community, not knowing and not wanting to go too far too fast. And so this is a number that we feel comfortable that we can start with. And if there is a larger push for TLT revenue because of the outreach, then there's potential more money in the future that we could allocate directly to the grant.
Okay, Val?
Yeah, I just want a clarification on that as well, because it seems to me that 35,000 was the amount that you suggested after you already set up the paid for staff and set up the reserve, am I correct?
Yes, that is correct. So that 35,000 is in that 145,000 excess, and so we think that there's some room to take that off the top.
Okay, so I would suggest 35,000, and like you said, if it doesn't get used, I would imagine it would just roll over to the next year.
Okay, Rob?
My knee-jerk reaction is that 35,000 is really high, too high. I have a question for JC. You quoted City of Ashland. They've got a minimum award or minimum grant is $1,000, maximum is $5,000. Do you happen to know what total that they would allocate in a year?
It's on their website. They published it. I didn't look at the total though.
But to me, if you got max maximum award 5,000, minimum 1,000. If grants in that, that denomination are kind of common, again, 35,000 just seems really high to me. You know, I'd be looking at 15 or 20,000, but I would like to know, even though they are a different city than we are, I would like to know what their total amount of grants that they give out in a typical year look like. But to me, I think 35 is more than I think we should be. I think we can find, put it this way, I think we can find other qualifying uses for that money that would, that could be as good or better use than running it through tourism.
Aaron?
So to maybe help with that, to just have guidelines, 1 to 5, as Councilor Pell is saying, is maybe a lot for our community, as we provide only $5,000 to Boatnik, and that's one of the largest events in the state. So if you're looking at being able to provide up to $5,000 for, say, a much smaller event, there's an inequity there of how much you're spending based on the true value of the heads and beds type of concept. So maybe council could establish something that they'd feel comfortable with from a level of service providing the dollars. Say it's $500 to $1,500 as a level, because these are events that you were trying to build within the community. Likely the signature events that we already have, we're sponsors for. So we're looking about things like Porch Fest. And how does Porch Fest compare to Boatnik? And maybe $1,500 is more of an appropriate amount. So maybe if council went, let's establish grant guidelines of $500 to $1,500, and you could say up to $3,500, but that would be a huge amount of grants in order for you to get up to, $35,000. So I think if you set a parameter to begin with, I think anything is better than what we've had in the past, and that might provide some comfort level with moving forward, at least in the first year.
Rob?
Yeah, I agree with the principle of what Aaron is talking about. The main reason is that if, you can make almost anything appear successful or popular the very first year if you pump enough money into it up front. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be self-sustaining or that it actually is popular or is worthy. So to offer a lower dollar amount up front and have whatever group that is actually have to essentially prove it to themselves and prove it to us that the event is worthy by going out and getting their own sponsorship money, by actually working hard and making it a good event. At that point, yes, we're chipping in a little bit. In subsequent years, we have an idea of whether or not that event actually was a worthy event and a practical, ongoing, sustainable event. But again, we could blow it out of the water with 5 or 10 grand to begin with. It doesn't show us that it's actually self-sustaining or valuable.
Valerie?
Well, I'm just going to say, I think that when you're talking assets as well as activities, I think that's the purpose of the Tourism Advisory Committee. I think what we're doing is we're ourselves vetting for them. And so I personally think that's kind of what you're taking away from them. I think that by them setting up the parameters and them looking at it, then you're giving them the trust, because they're going to come back before we approve anything anyway. So I think we're putting the cart before the horse with us specifically setting up and vetting it before they even have a chance to talk about it. So that's my thought. My thought is let them take a look at the vetting. I think they know that we want to be economically, I think they want to be economically conservative as well. So I don't know that we even need to at this point without more of them vetting it, setting up those parameters.
I agree with you. I just wanted a ballpark figure because I think it might be really important for them to know whether, the potential budget is 5,000 or 35,000 as they, come up with their framework for the grant. So we've had a little bit of discussion about maybe not the full 35,000. Other ideas? Joel?
Well, and we've, great discussion. Takes a long time. The other thing that our city manager brought up was there's some existing ones where the city already sponsors it, in his words, it could be construed as a grant in other words, so it's up to 5,000. And it would include some of those existing sponsorships that the city has, and that then would come from that application. And if that's the case, then perhaps, and I don't know how many of those sponsorships we have throughout the year, but it would incorporate new sponsorships, which I think is the intent, and also cover the existing sponsorships. So there's a part of me that says, let's just continue with the existing sponsorships, because the intent here is to get even more new ones. But you could incorporate it to be all-inclusive. I didn't want to muddy up the waters, but I just did.
All right. Anybody else? Kurt?
I'll just throw this little piece of wisdom in from my experience, kind of in following what Rob said. It was my experience in marketing. I learned a long time ago that marketing can sell a product once. After that, the product's got to sell itself. So if you do it right the first time and then it follows up, you'll get follow-on customers. Just saying.
DJ?
Yeah, I understand the arguments about the kind of a reduced amount. For this year, given the revenues and what they are, I'd be inclined to give it a wider berth, put the $35,000 aside and see what happens.
Okay. Well, since we're not making a final decision today, let's let the committee work out the grant with kind of that idea in mind that they're probably looking at a healthy chunk of money. All right. Any further discussion on this? DJ?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, since we had tourism here and Committee on Public Art representatives, I just wanted to say that I, at least as individual, I'm keen to ideas of general fund utilization, to try not to get stuck on TLT and the ORS regulations. If you guys have a fantastic idea that doesn't align exactly with TLT allocation, that shouldn't prohibit you from making recommendations from council. COPA is a great example. Sarah, you guys had a brief discussion about, okay, maybe maintenance or promotion of the art could be TLT, but then others could be general fund. I just want to encourage you guys to do all the good work, make the good recommendations, because we're only tied at ORS with the TLT, but we do have discretionary funds, and I think we're all inclined to do the good work in the community.
All right, let's jump back to COPA for just a minute here. Well, we've got them here and we've had this discussion. And what is the current process? I guess if someone could give us a little bit of an overview. I know COPA has some funds. What is the current process for providing funding for, you know, whether it's parking lots or the art box designs or a new mural right now?
So we've been handling that through the annual budget process, where there is, you know, a specific allocation usually called out during the budget committee and put into the staff's recommended budget, an amount that, you know, is recommended for that. And so the recommendations this year, I think, you know, kind of came from that. They were very similar to the last year's and somewhat based on the alley beautification process. And, you know, we're going to run out of alleys here pretty soon that can actually be used for that. But they are focused on the Beaver right now, you know, but next year, assuming that we have the call for artists that's active right now for the Beaver, but that's 15,000. So, you know, but this year, assuming that we get the artists and that Beaver lot is done and the alley beautification is done, and what COPA's, you know, discussion is between now and, you know, February or so when we develop a staff recommended budget, then I think we would look at what some of those other options might be. But, you know, it's the box one is similar, you know, in terms of knowing, okay, you know, are there any grant potential out there? So we, you know, we also factor that in. If there's any potential grant money, then that would reduce the amount of the general fund requests that we would put in.
Okay, so with the exception of the bus program, which seems to have donated funding, we're deciding on an annual basis, a project-by-project basis, to provide money for a particular project.
Correct.
A mural, a parking lot, whatever it is, and they are asking for what? Because I think they are wanting kind of a specific dedicated pot of funds that they could decide on an annual basis within the 10,000 or whatever.
Right, and maybe Cal wants to speak more to it, but I mean, certainly what they have been discussing up to this point, they historically did have, that funding that was there to use that was not grant. And as JC mentioned, the city policy, does specifically say they have no authority to spend the money unless the city grants a committee, that's some kind of authority. Well, I think historically those that are on the committee were there when there was some funding that was there. It is no longer there other than the Art in Motion because of the grant. And so, unless there's unless that project specifically fits under that Art in Motion qualification where the grant has to be spent, then at this point, there is not just that general fund money that's there for COPA to spend. So I think part of what we're dealing with here, and maybe the council liaison, Ojay, can help clarify that, is I think they're looking for, what exactly is the allowance for them. Well, staff has told them there really isn't, at this point, a general fund allowance for you to just go and choose whatever projects you want to, other than Art in Motion, because that grant is still sitting there, that $1,000, it's there, it's available. But, and then of course this year you did approve $1,500 for Art of the Month. So that $1,500 was a recommendation from COPA to the council, and you approved that $1,500 for Art of the Month. So that was given to the Daily Courier, and that project, that program is ongoing. So,
do you know how much they had been receiving up until fiscal year 2020?
I don't know the exact amount. Maybe Aaron has.
They were receiving $15,000 a year for the parking lot art. That's what was allocated to them. It was for a specific project, which was for art in parking lots.
Okay, so that we've redone again this year, they have 15,000 for the parking lot.
Yep, so we
Okay.
reinitiated it in '23, the 15,000 for the parking lot.
But
That's
any
what
other special projects, the flowers in the alleyway, things like that would have been a special request?
Yeah, or just like the alley beautification, that went through the budget process and it was accounted for. So that was, in my tenure, that's what I recall of monies for COPA. But that COPA was never granted, here's $10,000, you guys can do what you want to with it, whatever art project you want. It all went through strategic planning and was identified as an expense and then ended up being an LB project of some sort.
And I do want to add another point. The $15,000 that was given this year was not general fund money. It was excess LB00 money as a one-time funding source to get the project done potentially. So there wasn't a general fund allocation this year.
Valerie?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, because I was the liaison for actually quite a long time. And I think that their assumption is when they were first given the assignment to a piece of art at each parking lot, that they just assumed, and at that point they were given a budget of $15,000. I think the assumption at that point was that that was going to continue on until they were done with the parking lots. And so I think that's kind of was the assumption, is that was going to continue on. And then suddenly last year it was taken out because of the constriction of the budget. And I think that's kind of what threw them off, is because they thought, well, I thought we wanted to finish, because every time you'd say, well, which one are we going to do next, was kind of the movement that they were on. So I think that was kind of what kind of put a stop to it, when all of a sudden it was just kind of pulled, because no, we're not going to guarantee you that. And then last year we just went and took it out of another source. So I think that was part of it. I also know that when they did the boxes, art boxes, once again, that went through I mean, first of all, I'll say that also the alleyways was first brought up through, Blue Zone took it and did a big thing with it. And then Blue Zone kind of fizzled out, which kind of meant, you know, what were we going to do? But at a strategic planning, it was decided to do one of them. And that was the money that was allocated for the one that was done. And that's all the money that's been allocated at that point. I'm not sure about the art boxes. I know that they did get some extra funding from Cultural Trust. They went out and got a grant from Cultural Trust. And I'm not sure if they got that from somewhere else, but that also came through strategic planning. So I think for the most part, it's always come down from through strategic planning. Their assumption was that they were going to finish the parking lot. So that was the goal of the city, to have a piece of art in each parking lot. And so I think that's where the conundrum came in. And I do think a big piece was when we went and put $10,000 towards maintenance, because that was an ongoing issue, is that suddenly all these art pieces that we put on needed maintenance, and there was absolutely none, not even with the parking lot, but with all the art around town, that they needed an ongoing fund. So I think the ongoing fund that I'm assuming means that's going to be ongoing, that's put into the budget. It's not considered a piece that will be yanked, am I correct? But that's ongoing, was really instrumental to helping them move forward with keeping that going. But I personally think that there's really nothing wrong with it going through strategic planning. I think it's just an understanding of you know, that maybe, you know, I think all of us would agree that if they come up with a good piece of art for each parking lot, and that's something that's a great thing to do, we'll continue it. But I do think it has to kind of go along with what we can afford. So do you have the answer about the
Is it
art
ongoing?
boxes? I'm just curious.
Oh. I think
Art boxes? Yeah, there was some donated funds for that, and those, I think we've expended that's fully expended now, so we don't have money for additional art boxes.
Okay.
And then Valerie also mentioned that is the 10,000 for maintenance, is that an ongoing line item?
It is as much as the general fund has the ability to provide those resources. I believe that's a general fund. Yeah, so just like the $15,000 for each parking lot, that was general fund dollars. So it's according to ultimately the council through the budget process, allocation of general fund resources. We are all aware that general fund does not have the capacity and ability to continue to take on additional burdens. It's just the opposite. General fund is having to be more restrictive with the rising costs in our public safety services. Therefore, some of these other items, like the $15,000 for parking lots, needed to be curtailed in order to help balance the budget to maintain service levels in public safety and those kind of things. So that $15,000 and or the $10,000 is there, but it's general fund, and it does have flexibility for council to appropriate based on your budget policy.
Okay. Vanessa, did you have something?
Yeah, I believe it was that the council, COPA asked for the city council $3,500 for the art box project. They received a 4-way grant for $1,000 and the $500 grant from Josephine County Cultural Trust. So I think that that's how that project was funded. But to answer your question, Mayor Bristol, the ask today did come through strategic planning, and the specific ask is to designate a portion of the tourism lodging tax to fund projects and promotions, tourist promotions, festive street flags, and dramatic banners highlighting local natural amenities and intriguing features of the city, printed art walking maps, and a wayfinding system with an online portal and searchable database, Art of the Month promotion, published via social media channels for all existing artworks, including artist information. It further states these public art ideas and more would be funded through a small portion of the tourism lodging tax. After an in-depth review of other similarly sized cities, it was discovered that many have designated 2 to 12% of their TLT funds toward art installations and materials.
Interesting, thank you. Joel?
So Vanessa, that was through strategic planning, correct?
Yes.
And so what was the result of the strategic planning on that item as they went through that process?
It did make it to our 2022 strategic plan.
Okay, so because of the other items were deemed by the council to be higher priority, is that what happened?
I'm not sure where it fell on the list, but I know it made it on it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where.
So there's numerous projects that fit that category from all committees, correct?
Sure, but COPA's the one that made the ask.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
So just hearing that list, I guess, for the first time in a few months, it strikes me that some of those things could be potentially fall into this tourism grant program that we're talking about. And so maybe some of those funds would not end up going to, an existing event at all. But I think that's going to take somebody's, analyzing whether, do banners, count or not and that sort of thing. I mean, certainly banners don't reach out to people that are 50 miles away and make them spend the night, but they do add to the overall appeal of the town. So I think somebody needs to take up that list and analyze those items, but I don't know off the top of my head who that should be. Do you want to take a look at that, Aaron, and we'll come up with a plan for how to handle that request?
Sure. I guess what I'm trying to get to is some clarity on where council wants to go and if they have a desire to try to allocate a designated amount of funds each year for art projects. And if that's the case, then we need to identify that resource. So we can try to bring this to closure. If we're going to utilize that $35,000 as part of that, would that be an allowable use for some of the art projects?
And I think it goes back to what the art is. So like page 9, slide 17. So tourism promotion, so publicizing and welcoming tourists. If the art in some way had lived rogue, it's the climate, something that ties back to the city and that promotion of the city, I would think that would be an allowable use of that art. But if it's just a art on the parking lot, I don't know if that qualifies as a tourism-related facility or a promotion of the city.
So it could be that council might want to say, of this percentage that we have of 35,000 we've allocated for a potential grant program, maybe council would like to say 5%, 10%, 50%, 75% of this extra, whatever it is, and it'll be a floating number. Could be 5,000 one year, could be 50,000 in 1 year. That COPA will get a designated percentage off of this that will go to approved activities, which would be focused on the approved activities. Therefore, they'll have a pot of money for something. It may not be something they may have another project they'd like to do, and they'd have to seek general fund guidance from council but they would have a designated fund for certain projects as long as it meets that criteria with those dollars.
Would it be the same pot of $35,000 that we'd be looking at for both of these committees?
Yeah, I think that's where we're going with that, is that this would be a way that you could establish two programs right now with direction. You can provide us direction to try to establish two programs, the grant program, and then also a dedicated funding source for COPA projects that are in alignment with the allowable use for those dedicated funds.
Okay, or if we wanted to have a more diverse opportunity for COPA, it would need to come from general fund.
You could, and not just necessarily general fund, but if you wanted to, you could and if you wanted to still have it in the TLT bucket, but with general fund usage, the ability to use, you could take a look at our public safety, our parks maintenance, our economic development, or downtown money that they're currently getting, and maybe somehow work on that. But if you were to take some of those or something along those lines and utilize that, you'd have to reduce spending and some of those other things. So it gets complicated unless you're using just this overage that we're talking about. Someone else would be affected.
Right. Brian?
So with regards to this COPA request, I'm failing to see the necessity of it. The past couple years, COPA has made motions and brought things forward to council to ask for funding for specific projects, and council has been happy to grant those requests because they've been worthy requests from the committee. I don't know that that system needs to be changed. The committee has the ability to make motions to request funding for projects from council, so I just don't understand why we need to have a ongoing dedicated funding source. I'm not following.
I agree, there's two different ways of doing things, I guess, or none at all, but one thing that strikes me is, for their ask, is that if they knew, let's say that they could spend 10,000 of general fund money, so it doesn't have all this tourism restriction, then they could decide that they want to do banners for downtown, or they could decide that they want to do the art boxes. And it would still need to come to council for approval, but they know that, you know, however they want to cut the pie, they could make proposals for $10,000 without having to wait for the next strategic planning and budget cycle to come around. So it kind of lets them know up front basically what their allowance is. And then they could always come and ask for more. But, you know, yeah, again, if you wanted them to come every January and make a proposal, and you know, pick which things you're interested in and which you're willing to fund, that's an okay process too. It's maybe a little slower is what comes to my mind. DJ, then Rob.
Yeah, I think you explained that very well, Sarah. Just very briefly, I'm finding myself to be more of a proponent of COPA having an expected allowance of some kind. I think that we could expect a lot more productive work out of them if we were to do it as you just described.
Rob?
I would generally agree with that it'd be good for them to know where they stand every year and where they're going to be next year. I'd like to just kind of modify, I believe, and appropriately modify JC's opinion on appropriate uses for some of the money, parking lot art. I think we have to remember that generally, I think by definition, it's kind of comical, artists are creative, right? So, you know, you want to put salmon in a parking lot, you know, you could title that piece GP Where the Salmon Jump, or GP Where the Osprey Fly, or GP Where the Locals Ride the Mountains for the, you know, for Dollar Mountain or whatever. And there you go, there's your tie-in to the tourism money, and that way we don't have to touch general fund money. So we just have to be a little more creative than, you know, a computer program with regards to titling or labeling the art. But I think, and that's what the artists can do. They just need to know that to be funded and to get the, you know, access to the tourism money, they've just got to find a creative way to tie it into an attraction for our area. That shouldn't be hard for an artist to do. That's what they do. That's what they have fun with, and that way we don't have to worry about you know, our general fund balance.
Joel?
You know, from a policy standpoint, just doing that with one committee and not doing it with the other committees, I think is kind of short-sighted. So like the tree committee, the historic commission, the parks committee, they have the same things going on. And so to just do it with the arts committee or COPA, and they're good, but you know, we're responsible for policy. The other thing I'm thinking is, if they have a project that is really good, they can bring it up outside of the strategic planning process. We hear those all the time. And you don't need a standing allocation for all these committees for them to do that. I mean, you know, being on the tree committee, I'm sure they could spend $10,000 and it would be very good. And we're going to be discussing it, you know, at the next one, and we're going to be discussing the art walk that's coming forth. Good projects. So I think we need to be a little bit careful policy-wise, and substance is great, I mean, the art is great, the last weekend was great in terms of what happened, but policy-wise, I think we need to be consistent and looking out for the long term, and given that flexibility that people can bring it. If it's outside our strategic planning process, it can still come before us, but that doesn't mean it's automatically going to be funded for all committees, not just COPA.
Vanessa?
I agree with Councilor Pell. I prefer the tourism lodging tax allocation. I think we wouldn't have to conduct the shape shifting of the general fund to have that annual allocation, so I prefer the TLT method.
Val, then Rob?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's why having a little bit of a bigger $35,000 chunk is valuable, because other people can come in too, and I think that's a great place for it. Also too, and I was gonna check with this, because I do know that we have parks, money allocated for parks. Is there a way for them, if they were to put a piece of, or was it park, is that something else that they can also do? I was just curious if that fits into somehow the park development.
That fits under more park maintenance, not park development, or like an LB capital project or something along those lines. If we were gonna do some kind of bigger art project in a park, we'd probably make an LB project out of it, unless it was something just really small.
Okay, just curious, but I agree. I think that, and sadly enough, it's, as I watch our general fund get eaten up with public safety costs and knowing where we are right now, I just hate to step outside that box and make up a special thing for one particular committee.
Rob?
Yeah, I think Joel makes a really good point with regards to having basically the council valuing all of our committees and commissions. And I think if we were to tie that back into kind of Aaron's suggestion earlier of smaller dollar amounts, whether it's $500 to $3,000 grants or something along those lines, then there's, I guess, enough for different committees and commissions to essentially compete for, and there's a reason for them to try to be creative too. So rather than just limit it to COPA, even though I'm sure we'll get a good bang for the buck with COPA, that's not to say we couldn't get a good bang for the buck from some of our other committees also. But I think if we lowered the grant amount, it would provide more for the different committees to go around. And that we could potentially keep the $35,000 total there, but it could be divided up more ways.
Okay, I'm a little confused on what we're talking about again here, because we were talking earlier about having the tourism committee develop a grant framework to provide tourism promotion dollars. And those monies need to be spent to bring people in from out of town. So they're probably, they can be creative, but they're more or less marketing programs to bring people in from a distance and spend the night. And now we're talking about money for a lot of different committees. So kind of lost here in what we're talking about. Everybody's a little lost. Okay, good.
Just as a reminder, you do have, and it was mentioned, but I just wanted to make sure, you do have money allocated for committees. And maybe you want to look at bolstering that next year and going bigger or with it, where the committees do approach you. You do have money to allocate for special activities.
Is that 10,000 total?
Right now, it's ranged from 10 to 20. I think it was 20.
This year's 10.
This year's 10. It was 20 in the past. So you have the ability for someone like COPA or someone like Parks or someone like Tree Committee to say, oh man, there's this great project. If we only had $2,000, we could really do this cool thing. They have the ability to come to you and have that project funded.
Okay, Brian?
Yeah, I'm concerned that doing this for COPA becomes a slippery slope for the other committees, where the other committees see, oh, COPA has a standing funding source. Why don't we have a standing funding source? And then we get into this issue where the other committees are vying for a standing funding source, and then this line item starts ballooning into a huge committee line item funding source, when the committees have a perfectly reasonable mechanism to ask for funding of projects already. So I support COPA and I've voted yes on every project they've brought forward, but I don't think having standing funding for committees and setting that precedent is a very good idea.
Okay, is there anybody who wants to discuss the idea of having a portion of those tourism lodging tax dollars, the 35,000, be dedicated towards art projects? Just to kind of close a window here, Vanessa's saying yes, DJ's saying yes. Maybe, okay. Should this be something we have?
I was just going to say, I think that the key is it goes back to the standards that the tourism committee is going to guide us with, if that's a possibility. Because I don't think at this point I know whether it's a possibility. But it seems to me that we turned back to the tourism advisory to give us clear standards. And at that point, if that fits under those standards, that would be great. But I think that's, once again, we're putting the cart before the horse, because we don't really know whether that's a viable use, and I would think they would have that better expertise than I do. So that's why at this point I don't think we can really make that decision until after they come forward and then we see what guidelines they've set up with that.
Okay, at one point it came up in discussion of having a percentage dedicated, so I got 2 people to raise their hands. I just want to see if that's something that that the tourism committee really needs to kind of work into their plan, or whether COPA needs to work on that further. But if I'm only seeing 2 hands, then it seems like maybe that's not the direction that we want to go in at this time. So I'm not advocating for it, I'm just asking the question. Okay, so at this point we have the tourism committee is going to be working on framework for a grant. We have this list that Vanessa nicely read of kind of recommendations from the tourism committee, from COPA rather, that we approved during strategic planning, that I think I need to see that written out, and we need to kind of parse that out, because it had multiple things that maybe they could request a grant for some of these if they apply for if they're appropriate for tourism promotion, and then there may be some other items that we could look at in other ways. But I guess at this point I don't feel like we have any sort of consensus on what to do about identifying a standing budget line item for arts. So we will have another opportunity, of course. Strategic planning's right around the corner, and we can talk about that a little more. All right. We ready to move on to agenda review? Good deal. At least this is fun stuff we're talking about today, huh? Bringing people to our lovely city. October 17th, our workshop is actually more tourism and downtown things. So we are going to talk about the Welcome Center remodel next Monday, wayfinding signs, and the downtown plan as a follow-up to last week's discussion. Then we have a business meeting next Wednesday where we will have a public hearing on the RCC annexation, the resolution to consider an affordable housing grant SDC waiver, a resolution for the membrane procurement phase 1 for our water treatment plant, a resolution authorizing a grant agreement between Josephine and the Josephine County Housing Council and Jackson County Housing Council, a resolution with an option agreement and memorandum of understanding for Meadowwood Reservoir, a resolution awarding the Caveman Pool design and architect, a resolution for the State Fire Marshal's Engine Program Grant, a resolution for the Oregon State Parks Land Water Conservation Fund, a resolution for a Schroeder Lane Stormwater project, a resolution revising the comprehensive fee schedule, a resolution for the SEAT membership change, a resolution for FirstNet AT&T mobility agreement, a resolution regarding funding for the Sobering Center, and appointing some members to our Sustainability and Energy Action Task Force, as well as the Tree Committee and the Housing Advisory Committee. That gets us through next week. Rick?
I have a question on the resolution for Caveman Pool Design and Architect. Did we not have an RFP out there, and what was the focus of the RFP before? Was that just for the cost of a new pool, or am I mixing up?
So the RFP was design of a pool. So we're probably looking around that 170,000 mark for an architect / designer to bring forward a site plan with design recommendations for the pool facility, not engineering, not build, just the design element. And so that RFP did go out. We received the 3 responses, and then what's on the agenda is a recommendation of the scoring panel.
So the purpose of my question is that if we're looking at a pool design, and theoretically, if you just got a ballpark figure, and I'm not sharing that this is the right, it would not be the right figure, but just to emphasize the question, if the pool design came back at $10 million, would we proceed with that? And therefore, if we know that a minimum pool is $10 million, would we go forward with that project, or would we no longer use the architect? Would we go back and look at alternative choices?
Oh, I think you definitely have the option to look at alternative choices. This
So-
RFP is strictly just for bringing forward a couple of design options, but there's nothing that's going to be setting the council in stone on.
So the architect design and fees would be, you said 135,000 possibly?
Right, well, it's probably a little bit more than that. We did not include a request for a specific number, but we have since received one, and it's looking like from the recommended RFP awardee, somewhere around that 170.
Okay, so the question I'd have for council, do we go ahead with the architect's design and cost if we really need, because of what's changed in material costs and so forth, if we don't know where we're headed with the pool? I don't have the answer. I'm just putting that out there. Thank you.
All right, Brian.
I had a question on next week's presentation on the Welcome Center remodel. I was just curious what the scope of that presentation might be.
It was coming back to council with a couple of concepts based on the last recommendation for us to consider some garage doors on different sides of the building, what might work, what might not work, for us to try to finalize. Ultimately, Jason would love to have a finalized design at that workshop so we can go ahead and move forward with the Welcome Center. That's the one piece where we're ready to go. We just want to confirm it's looking like this and this is what it's going to be. So that's what we're hoping to get out of the workshop.
Joel?
Brian, didn't we already agree on that at our last council meeting, or at our last, when that was brought before the council?
I think staff was going to bring back a couple options for the roll-up doors again.
Okay, and that's what this is, okay.
That's correct. We were asked to consider garage door type openings for it being more welcoming and an opportunity to have more of event style type of activities coming out of there, and consider the different sides of the building and where that might be appropriate.
So just to follow up on that, I don't know if it's appropriate for the presentation, but I've had conversations with a couple of counselors since that last discussion about the design that we have chosen, and maybe not everyone being satisfied with it. So I'm certainly going to bring that up next week, whether or not it's part of the presentation. And then the other part that we haven't talked about yet with the Welcome Center is the space behind the Welcome Center. I feel it's pretty poorly utilized and it could be better. So that's another thing I'll probably be bringing up next week.
So if there's anything specific you'd like to hit, if you'd like us to bring up the 7 different mock-ups of what we looked up in the past, we can do that as part of the presentation. If you want to have that kind of consideration or level discussion again, or just have it as a review, let me know. Let me know what you'd like to have in the presentation. We'll do that. But from our perspective, it's just trying to get feedback on, okay, we talked about, we have this general guideline of this is sort of the design we're looking at. Now incorporating garage doors, what side would we be looking at, what would be best, and then getting feedback from council to say yes or no to that and moving forward.
I think it would be good to have an overview of those different facade options again. I've talked to a few different people and I'm not sure anyone's super excited about it. Val?
Well, I will say, and I know I've talked to a lot of people about different things, but one of my priorities is moving it on and not continually kicking it down the road. But it seems to me that the garage doors, one of them was whether we wanted a garage door or another type of door. Am I correct on that one, Aaron? Because if I remember the garage door, we also talked about having a different type of door. Was that part of the discussion?
The concept was garage door, having it more open and welcoming. If it's something else than a garage door you want, but you want something like tri-fold doors, which would be much more expensive, we could do that. I think the concept though is what we're needing direction from is based on the current design that's been recommended. We have that as a baseline. And then we've got, here's where the garage doors would work. Where would you prefer to have them? And this is sort of what it might look like. And if we get direction from council on that, then we can go ahead and move forward. If council needs to reconsider the base design that we're currently working off of, then this would be an appropriate time to have that discussion if you want to make changes to that, the foundational design that we're looking at.
Okay, I think, and it's, like I said, I'll take whatever I get, but I just remember having a discussion as to whether to go a garage door or like a French door or a different door as so I guess I'll just talk to you about it separately. I'll just try to remember, go back and re-look at it. But I personally think it's important that we move forward and stop kicking the can around.
Agree. Looking forward to having that project done, but I think also if we're going to spend a bunch of money, we want to make sure we're happy with the direction. Okay. Anything else? I know we have some blank spots coming up here as we move towards the end of the month in November. So we have some thing from the back or new idea that you want to make sure gets taken care of, Rob?
Yeah, so what we had considered, and it's been brought up a couple times, and it really needs to, at least the initial discussion needs to be done before December, is the concept of including some kind of 360 review in the city manager's evaluation process, or not, but we need to discuss that and kind of decide if we want to make that have that discussion in depth, I guess, at his evaluation, or whether it can be done prior. But we basically have essentially had no formal discussion about it, even though I know myself and several other councilors feel that that would be a valuable tool for us to have. So I'd like to have that discussion long before his evaluation in December.
I just want to add, I think it's my understanding that it couldn't happen this year, that it would have to be for the following year because you can't change an evaluation process midway through. So the process that we currently are under will be the process that we do the evaluation on this year, and if we're going to change it, it would be for the following year. Am I correct?
Valerie, that's not the point that I was trying to make, but I understand what you're saying. My point is that since we can't do anything about it this year, even though we could have if we had started much earlier, but since we can't, next thing you know, as of the day of the manager's evaluation in December, we will then be starting into the new year. At that point, we'll then be another year behind if we don't get out in front of it. That's my point.
Okay, yeah, I see that we have a memo here today that has to do with the evaluation process for this year, so we will have that discussion in a timely manner. Brian?
Yeah, I was wondering when we're going to get properties back on executive session. I thought that was going to be turned around pretty quick, and I'm not seeing it on here.
Okay, yeah, I think next week is what we're looking at.
We can definitely have a discussion next week, and I could talk to you in more detail about that during our meeting on Wednesday.
Oh, my meeting with you on Wednesday?
Yes.
Okay,
But if you'd like to schedule an executive session, I can provide some details based on your request.
okay. Yeah, let's plan on talking about properties next Monday again. Joel?
So one of the other things, as we look forward to the agenda in November and December and the holidays and then thereafter, over at the League of Oregon Cities, I think our city council meets more often per month than any other city I met over there. There'd be a possibility as we move forward to be more efficient and free up some staff time and plus free up some other time for relationships with the folks up here so that we can not only work with our peers, but with the federal and state officials, and then with our NPOs, that perhaps we condense it and maybe remove one workshop a month unless there's a need for that workshop to be held on an urgent topic.
Yeah, we have, we've done that a couple times. We don't have a holiday coming up exactly, but I don't know which of these weekends is Thanksgiving this year, but I'm thinking maybe the 28th is the Monday after Thanksgiving. Anyway, should we all just plan on canceling the Monday after Thanksgiving right now? And then I'll also take a look and see if there's something else maybe towards the end of October that we could take a pass on.
It's also a little more friendly for those that have full-time jobs, because it's an effort. I know it's an effort.
Yeah, it sure is. Thank you. Okay, yeah, it looks like Thursday, November 24th is Thanksgiving, so we'll take off the 28th, and then we'll have a look at other potential days to take a little breather. Anything else at the moment? Brian?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. DJ, thank you. All in favor of adjourning today? Any opposed? Rick voted twice. All right, we are adjourned. See you next Monday.